Very similar story, the story of Saint John the Baptist, and there you can really venture to say we have to do with a particular way the karma works, because it's almost like it's exactly the same story, same individualities with in different times, hundreds of years later, in different names. Saint John the Baptist, Elijah, comes into confrontation with one of the children of Herod the Great, of whom we know from the Gospel of Matthew, also a black magician, by the way, who 300 years after Jezebel was cultivating the same type of spirituality. We know that through the picture of the so-called slaughter of the innocents described in the Gospel of Matthew is exactly continuation of mysteries of Baal and mysteries of ancient Mesopotamia. This is of course depicted often as Herod was bad. He was looking to kill Jesus because he was jealous. There is much more to it. In fact, Herod the Great, who was a quite powerful ruler, was fueling his power through terrible black magical events like that of slaughter of the innocents. His children who survived him had similar ways of accumulating power as their father had. You have to understand that this is a lineage we're talking about. Lineage. This is flowing in humanity for thousands of years. I'll just put it this way. It was covered by the lid of mysteries until quite recently. We're more and more becoming aware that those things are cultivated, and they always have to do with people who accumulate incredible power. John calls Herod's son, another Herod, Antipas, because Herod Antipas took a wife who was married to his brother. John the Baptist, and this is depicted in the Gospel, he's very influential. His word, that of forerunner of preparing the space for the Christ, it becomes so widely known that Herod, he was very curious. He wants to see, and he wants to be seen too. So he goes where John is preaching, baptizing, and John does something that could, from a certain point of view, appear completely irrational. Namely, he, instead of taking this opportunity, we would say today, and connecting with someone influential, he sees Herod, and he right away issues a very strong moral judgment, in fact, condemnation. You are married unlawfully to your brother's lawful wife. John got arrested right away and placed into a very special place. Before I go there, just one word about this wife. That wife's name is Herodias. And Herod was at this time around 7 years old. Yet she left her husband, who was way younger, but way less influential, and marries his brother. And because of Herod Antipas, she gains access to the court at Rome. Herod is a friend with Tiberias, with the second emperor of Rome, who himself is insane. It's progressively insane. By the time when these events are happening, which I'm talking about, Tiberias leaves Rome and lives on an island, completely isolated, completely decadent. One of the hobbies that he has is to throw his opponents from a 30-meter high cliff into the ocean and watching how their bodies are destroyed by the rocks. So we're talking about interesting crowd here. What circumstances Christ actually incarnated into? It would be nice to say it happened then. It's not happening anymore because Christ is with us and we're all blessed. I dare say it's happening even more, even worse today, and yet Christ is really becoming present in the etheric realm. There is a need to speak about things like that out of this consciousness of the Johannian stream, Michaelist stream, so we also understand what type of challenge and what kind of battle actually is at hand. John gets placed in a place which was then Herod's favorite dwelling. This is the Dead Sea. It was here on the eastern bank of the Dead Sea called Maherus. Both Herod and Herodias could have very well spent their time in their main residence here in Galilee, where near the Sea of Galilee, Herod built a city as a tribute to his friend Tiberias. North and south, Galilee and Judea. Galilee is a place of everlasting, always birth-giving life forces. You ever been to Israel? Galilee is a place of life. This is where most of Christ's healings are taking place. This is where the Sermon on the Mount is being placed. Versus Judea, which is a desert, and a stony, rocky desert, lifeless. As a quintessence of that gesture of Judea is the Dead Sea, the deepest place on the planet where all life ceases to exist. The beautiful Jordan River flowing, going through the heart of the Galilee, finally ends, spills into the salt-imbued waters of the Dead Sea. Nothing can live there. So much so that around the banks of the Dead Sea, there is no life because there's so much salt in the air. This happy couple found their dwelling in Machaerus, which is actually a military castle built some 100 years prior to that. Machaerus means the sword. Now, here's an interesting thing. Josephus, Joseph Flavius, a Jewish historian, writes about this place. He in fact writes about the captivity of John the Baptist. Unlike Christ, John is a historical figure. There's no mention of Christ, of Jesus in the history of the Jews by Josephus. The persona of St. John is mentioned. And there, in conjunction with this arrest of St. John and placing him in the dungeons of Machaerus, Josephus says that it was known at that time that around this place, around this castle, plants grew known as having extraordinary poisonous qualities. For instance, plants of which extract had such toxic workings on those who were given it that another person could control that person. If you would be given such extract, you would become eyeless person. People could control you. Through that, again, we have a kind of a picture into the soul of this Herodias. Who is she? She likes this kind of atmosphere, likes this kind of spirituality. John is there in the dungeon, and you perhaps remember the way he dies. This time around, there is a banquet. There are many people present. Herod requests that his stepdaughter, Salome, dances for him and for all his guests. And Salome, who is a daughter of Herodias, belonging to this ancient stream that begins in Babilonia, is skilled and trained since her childhood to dance in such a way that the forces of attraction, the sexual forces, would actually be available. When you look at the oldest known poem, the story of Gilgamesh, that of Enkidu. Enkidu is a being that is still quite ethereal, is covered with hair all through, lives in the mountains with animals, with plants. And Gilgamesh, who is the most powerful, this is the biblical Nimrod, by the way, the great hunter, doesn't have an equal. And he finds out about the existence of this being, and he desires from now on to meet him and become his friend. He sends a temple prostitute who initiates Enkidu through the art of loving. And they spend a number of days together, and at the end, when he stands up, the hair, the coat that he was covered with, falls down. He becomes human being on earth. In this picture, mythic picture, we have a glimpse into those mysteries of Babylon, of using forces of attraction, forces of love. Salome has that skill, and when she dances during that meal, there is a moment when the men around, including Herod, they are losing their grip on reality. The king gave Salome his word if you dance for us, I will do anything you want. And this is when her lovely mother calls the girl and whispers to her ear, ask for the head of John the Baptist to be brought here on a plate. What extent of evil, what extent of black magic we're talking about? This is the head of a human being on a platter. Rudolf Steiner spoke about it, that this is actually in deep black magical procedure called the Black Mass. Terrible things. Sad story, and yet something amazing happens. John is killed. Jesus steps very gently, very slowly into his place, but differently than John. The students of the followers of John come to Jesus like a sheep without a shepherd. Christ sends them away. He sends them away. This is the first sending. He sends them for about 6 months. And after they come back, they're excited. The power of Christ is with them. They heal. They redeem. They work wonders. Christ takes them, they're back in Galilee, and here on Golem Heights, he takes them up to the mountain, and there on that mountain, an event takes place, which is the founding of the community of the disciples, the original Christian community, you would say, namely the feeding of the 5,000. The great spiritual vision and imagination of the future, where they see in this moment of elevation, this is not necessarily a physical situation, but they have this powerful group imagination. The streams of humanity are coming towards them. How are we going to feed them? There's this amazing conversation about means. Christ says, you feed them. And then comes this moment. There is a boy here who has bread and fish. Symbol that was always associated to the being of Elijah. You see, they, out of the spirit of Elijah, out of the spirit of St. John, murdered twice already, at least, they are able to form the first community of disciples, and it becomes a chalice that will feed the humanity until the end of times. Something we could say, this is the moment when the Grail became manifested in the circle of the disciples around Christ. So something tragic, murderous, treacherous, actually brings about an amazing resolve. The soul of St. John becomes the patron, the leader, the common consciousness of individuals that are gathered around Christ. And later, on the way of initiation of Lazarus, and works through Lazarus, John, we have this picture of this beautiful grail of community. We are, in a certain sense, reconstituting this chalice of the grail every time we gather around this sacrament of bread and wine. The spirit of John Elijah, the emanation of Michael, blessing this offering every time we gather around the altar. We are becoming the chalice, the grail, for the city around us, for the elemental beings around us, for people that we come in contact with. The Christ sun can shine through us further on. There is, of course, a concurrent stream that we could call an anti-grail. And it's not something that necessarily is an unconscious community, or it's not something that is generated by rejecting morality, being unconscious, being careless. I don't want to have any spiritual development. I don't care about any laws and rules. No, that's not enough. That's just, so to speak, the level of human freedom. Anti-Grail is a kingdom that is being consciously and intentionally generated as a force that will attract demonic beings into the life of human beings on earth. The critical element, character of our times is that we're becoming aware more and more that there are also people who are intentionally working against the Christ, against that rightful evolution of mankind. And these are people who also will make decisions for you and I because they are a power. And we need to know about it, and spiritually, instead of engaging necessarily in political fights, spiritually work as a counter force to that decadent world. Or we do it when we do Hallelujah, for instance, like we did with Gabriel today. When we gather around the altar, when we gather together in the name of Christ, when we cultivate practical anthroposophy. And I want to emphasize that not just theoretical, but practical anthroposophy. Meaning it's anthroposophy that is actually through your hands and feet working in our daily life.